Welcome to the Endless Knot Podcast,
where the more we know,
the more we want to find out,
tracing serendipitous connections through our lives
and across disciplines.
Hi, I'm Aven.
And I'm Marcy.
And today we're talking about color with Kory Stamper.
Woohoo! Kory Stamper is a lexicographer who was an associate editor of the Merriam-Webster family of dictionaries, and now travels around the country giving talks and presentations, as well as memorably appearing in the 2021 Netflix series History of Swear Words. She also does volunteer lexicography and language revitalization as a member of the Miami Nation of Indiana's Language Council.
Her debut nonfiction book was Word by Word, The Secret Life of Dictionaries, and her second book, True Color, The Strange and Spectacular Quest to Define Color from Azure to Zinc Pink, is out now. We spoke to her about this new book and our mutual fascination with colors. So hi, Kory. Welcome very much to our podcast. We are so excited to talk to you today. We have just finished listening to the book. We listened to it together. It was extremely exciting. Sorry, I'm already getting ahead of myself.
Yes.
But hi, welcome.
Hello. We absolutely loved it.
Oh, I'm so glad. It's so good to be here with you fine folk.
All right. So we'll start, before we get into the book, with our traditional first question. And I suspect you have many possible stories to tell, but tell us about an unexpected connection in your life, whether in your work, your research, your writing, your hobbies, whatever you would like.
I actually had a fabulous unexpected connection that happened just recently, in part because of writing and in part because of work. So I was signing my books at Independent Bookstore Day here in the US, and I was at a bookstore that had a whole bunch of authors lined up, one after the other, on the hour, every hour. And as I was finishing up my hour, a woman came in a very colorful shirt and said, oh, she picked up my books and she said, oh, what are your books about? And I said, oh, they're about dictionaries. She said, oh, my uncle wrote a book about dictionaries. I said, who's your uncle? And her uncle is Herbert Morton, or was Herbert Morton, dearly departed Herbert Morton, who wrote one of the first histories of Webster's Third New International Dictionary, which is the dictionary that I write about in my latest book. So I said, oh, yeah, of course I know Morton's book. Anyone who writes about this book knows about Morton. And she threw her hands up and clasped them to her chest and yelled, you know about Uncle Herbie? So because of Uncle Herbie, and because of this color book, I now am sort of an unofficial extended family member in the Morton family. So I was introduced to everybody, and Uncle Morton's niece is also a writer, and she was writing children's books, and she just happened to be scheduled to sign right after I had finished signing. So it was like a big family reunion. It was great.
Speaking of unexpected, that's great.
Yeah.
That's very unexpected, yeah.
Writing brings people together.
It does.
Dictionaries are the great uniters, right?
That's right. There we go. There it is.
That's fabulous. Okay, well, let's launch into the book then. This most recent book. Maybe you can give us a quick description of it. We can focus in on the things that struck us about it afterwards, because I will admit that I think we were both a little bit surprised by exactly what the content of it was. You know, I heard in general, I know you were writing it for quite a while, so like in my head, I think I thought I knew what it was going to be, and it wasn't quite that. Mm-hmm. And I think the subtitle is a bit both more and less specific than the content.
Yes,
that's possible.
I think that is possible.
It's more specific on some things than I think the book is, and it's less specific about other things than I think the book is.
True.
In your head, what is the book about, and how do you want to describe it?
So in my head, the book is about the attempt to come up with a plain language way of defining color names specific to the Third New International Dictionary, Webster's Third, and about the difficulty of doing that and how difficult it is to get your mind and your hands and your language around color, and some of the weird personalities, I guess we'll say, that were involved in this particular work, which was only done for one dictionary, even though I think it was intended to be a standard that would exist into the future.
Okay, yeah, so that touches on a couple of the points that in terms of more and less specific. So I'll just say that the more specific, the subtitle makes it sound like it's only about how to define the words, which certainly the book very much is about that. But we were both struck by how much it was about more widely the history of the Merriam-Webster third, or history of the dictionary in general. And then the other part where the book is more specific than I maybe thought it would be was that part that it is just. That is too small, the wrong word, but it is
the word we have, yeah.
It is specifically the story of that quest within the confines of the Merriam-Webster. And the third, yes, but in fact you actually tell more than just the third. Because let me start at the beginning. Wait, no, before that. No, before that. Kind of,
right. You see why it took so long to write this book now.
Yeah. Oh, I really do. But yeah, because I've been fascinated by color specifically for a long time in very particular ways. And so my mind immediately thinks in a longer historical sense about the development of color terms, which was not, while you certainly touch on, goodness knows you touch on everything in this book, but it was not the focus of the book. Right. So that's what I meant by both more and less specific. You know, it wasn't quite what I was expecting, but it was a delightful surprise.
Yes. I'm glad.
I think it really needs to be said, when you hear that this is a book about the history of a dictionary, it doesn't quite convey how absolutely gripping the book is.
I appreciate that.
I felt like I was going into withdrawal whenever we weren't listening to it. You really needed to know what happened next.
I tried very hard.
Such a compelling story.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a compelling story. And I think one of the things that was so compelling to me about it was, Avon, you touched on it, like, where do you begin? How do you start talking about color terms and defining colors and the development of color? But then you get into the personalities and all of the strange politics that go into dictionaries and go into color. And this could have been like a 5-volume book. I'm very glad for my poor reader's sake that it's not. But I could have gone there. It was just such a full topic.
Yeah, we started listening to it on a drive down to Toronto. It's a 4-hour drive. And so we were listening to it in the car, and we listened the whole way there with like almost no conversation. The much discussed, but I will not spoil it either, twist happened as we like pulled into the house we were staying at. Maybe 5 minutes before. We got to the end of that chapter and the beginning of the next one. And then we had to turn it off. And as we were going to bed that night, Marcy was like, do you have time? Like, could we listen to a little more?
Right.
A little more before bed?
Right. Surely we have 20 more minutes just to finish up what we were... Yes, I understand.
Yeah. So yeah, that has not really happened to me very often, even with fiction books, I've got to say. And that was surprising. We were not surprised that we found it a delightful book. We were surprised by the kind of book we found it.
I understand.
And I know I'm being vague for those of you who haven't read, the listeners who have not read it yet. It is a nonfiction book. The twist is not and then the aliens arrived. It's not that.
No. Sadly, no aliens in this book. Sorry.
Yeah. There are events that build to what you think is going to be an obvious conclusion, and then events go in a different way, as they do in life. But the way you write it plays that up a little bit to good effect, I think. So yeah, lots of fun.
Yes.
Great.
And also very funny. So be prepared to giggle aloud.
I am a ham. That is just, there's no denying that.
I'm sure I would have enjoyed it just as much on the page, but having you read it was
really special.
Oh, thank you so much also for dealing with my absolutely terrible French. I did not think as I was writing this book that so much of color history happens in France, and yes. French is not a language I can get my mouth around very easily.
Yes, we've had now, this is, as we relaunch our podcast, we've spoken to, as it turns out, 3 people with books about language, just has been the people who we've contacted. And one was a book about the alphabet and one was a book about accents. And we talked to both of them. and I'm sure you know which ones they are because they're on the tour,
Right.
on tours right
Yep.
now. You're all going on the same
We
podcast.
are. Yep.
But we've talked to both of them about the difference between the book and the audiobook. For both of them, they have the flipped problems. The alphabet is very visual.
Right.
But then you're trying to express what they sound like, and that's hard in writing.
Right.
But easier in an audiobook. But then how do you describe what hieroglyphics look like?
Right.
in
Sure.
writing?
Yeah.
And then the other one was the accent, which is hard to convey in writing, but easier when read. But on the other hand, you need people who have the accents. How we got around that by hiring people with different accents to read different parts of the book,
that
which
was
is
very
amazing.
smart. Yeah. Very good.
Yeah, different chapters are read by people with different accents. And then, of course, you are faced with the fact that you're talking about color the whole way through.
Yeah.
So that's very visual. However, you also don't have that much color in the book.
I don't. I don't. It's pretty ironic. In fact, a couple of friends of mine who got the book were like, did I miss like a whole section in the middle that should have had more color plates? I said, no, there really just were those 5 color plates. And they were like, oh, huh. It does get to the point that there are ways to talk about color that are language-based. The visual is also good. There's, for accessibility purposes, it's good to practice a little bit of what you're preaching when it comes to talking about color language. Yeah.
And the dictionary in question had to make do with relatively few color plates devoted to color.
Right.
So there you go.
That's right. Just 2. So, yeah.
It hadn't occurred to me until now, but so do you use colorimetric terms when doing the alt text for your social media posts? Because that would be amazing.
I don't.
A dark, strong,
I know, right.
purplish.
Right. A variable color averaging. No, I don't use those. I stick with sort of the more deep pink or dark blue.
You have so many words you could use, though. Where's
true.
the, what is it, pink Delthea? Or, yes.
Yeah, right. That was the thing that was so fascinating about going through all the color names in the third, was that so many of these color names are just no longer in use.
Yeah.
Which, just underscores the point that color names are also language, and language is always moving. And that includes these ephemeral and sometimes fanciful names that back in the 50s, when this dictionary is being written, people writing these definitions thought, of course, we're always going to be talking about sea pink or rose d'Althea or aloma. These colors that I'm just like, I don't know. I'm assuming that sea pink is a pink and rose d'Althea is probably also, but I couldn't pick out a color chip from the paint store if you said, get me the rose d'Althea one. So,
and aloma is just complete. I wouldn't even know where to start.
just a big blank box with nothing in it. Yep, exactly.
Okay, I have so many things I want to ask you about, but let me start with, so because what you were writing was in many ways a history rather than a technical guide to defining color, for instance, the whole way through, I was just wanted to ask you about the research process and about the sources and what you were using, because it's amazing, right? All of this incredibly detailed memoing. I hope to God never to work in a place that memos me that precisely.
I know.
And that has such precise minutes for meetings, because
Exactly.
So very precise records, extensive correspondence, personal correspondence and diaries, and like just a wealth of stuff. So also no wonder it took as long as it did, because you had so much to go through. But tell us about the sources, like where they came from, how you got access to them.
Yeah.
Just talk to me about your research.
Yeah. So it began really with a set of letters in the Merriam-Webster corporate archive. So Merriam-Webster, as a dictionary company, really loves its paper and doesn't throw anything away, ever. So it has an entire basement that's full of letters to and from people who are reading the dictionary, or people who are defining, or people who have questions, or William Sapphire, just all sorts of letters. And the first time that I ran into these definitions in the third, The third is a dictionary that every Merriam-Webster lexicographer can spot from 1,000 miles away. So you're trained in the style of the third. And these definitions were so weird. And I just thought, oh, they are so weird. And I couldn't figure out who wrote them. It was clear to me they had a system, and it was clear that someone had thought through it, but it did not have the hallmarks of any of the sort of editorial work on the third. So I happened to find a letter, one letter, from the color correspondent in big file. And then I found the whole cache of letters and just began reading through them. And the color correspondent, he was a color scientist, his name was I.H. Godlove. He was a Renaissance man in terms of color. He was absolutely a scientist. He was a physical scientist, but he was an artist, he was a writer, and he really was interested in matters of defining. So that started things. And so in addition to the letters, Merriam-Webster also keeps all of the notes for all of the definitions in all of the dictionaries that they've published. So I can go through, and as Godlove is talking about aloma, let's say, I can then go to the files where all of the definitions and the production notes are kept and look at the notes for aloma. So that gave me some of the first batch of research. But as I'm reading Godlove's letters, it's clear there are more people involved in this whole process from soup to nuts than I had realized. And so it was these concentric circles outward then. So then from this cache of correspondence, then it became, there was an academic group called the Inter-Society Color Council that was doing this work. So let's see if they have archives. In fact, they do have archives. So finding that, and then all of the members of the ISCC who are all involved in different parts of this color work. And so it just kept going out and out. And then I realized at a certain point that I.H. Godlove had personal papers that were not deposited in any libraries. I was in libraries all over the country looking at this person's papers and that person's papers. And I.H. Godlove had family papers that were held by family members. And through a connection at the Inter-Society Color Council, I actually got in contact with I.H. Godlove's grandchildren who had a whole bunch of family papers. So then I'm contacting some person who does not know me from any person. I'm like, hi, I'm writing a book about your grandpa, and I understand you have papers, and I would love to read. I would never let some rando in my house to do that, but these very lovely people did. So that was the cache of correspondence that was the meat of the research. But in order to understand why Godlove's work was so important and why this was such a revolutionary thing, then I'm also having to do research in color science, which I am not a scientist. And that was really complex information to deal with. So now I'm dealing with the colorimetric section from the National Bureau of Standards, and I'm reading about color science and spectrophotometry. I can't even say it. Colorimetry. I'm reading about all of this complex stuff. And then I'm also reading all of this history, because the history of color science and the development of this particular way of talking about color is so deeply tied to what's going on historically in the US and in the world. So it really, I ended up acquiring, I don't even know, probably hundreds of books for this project, and which I love. My office space it just looks like a rabbit's warren at this point, just between all of these little stacks of books. But it was so substantial to try and sort through all these things. And I'm sure there's still stuff that I couldn't get to, or that might flesh out more of this sort of long story. But I got through what I could get through. But I did a quick count of the number of pieces of paper that I took pictures of or scanned in archives. And it's over 10,000 pieces of paper. Just, wow. Yeah. I have an entire drive that's just devoted to scans for this book. So it's a lot. It's just a lot of research.
It's remarkable that the Godlove family did save those papers.
I know.
That's the sort of thing that within a couple of generations often get disposed of.
Yeah, so fascinating too, because it made me think the grandchildren understood who I.H. Godlove was, and I think that's why they kept some of these papers. But it just made me think about how many people are there who do phenomenal, interesting work, who have all of these ideas and notes that just once they pass away, or once they move and decide they don't want them anymore. We think of these things as so ephemeral, and yet those notes that the family kept were the glue that enabled me to tie a bunch of pieces of this story together that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to.
Yeah, it's such a difficult balance that we all face in our lives of, do you hold on to papers, and now digital files, and how much of an effort do you do? And it feels like such a weight, I think, around a lot. There's lots of people saying, oh, you don't want to pass these on to your kids and make them deal with it. This is an aside, but my mom is a poet in Canada, and she's published, 25, 30 books.
Okay.
She's not Margaret Atwood, but she's got a body of work and has known important people and done good work and things. And right now they're trying to figure out what to do. They're trying to move someone else into their home as well. So what do you do with all the stuff?
Yeah.
And she's been keeping papers since her early days, starting the first feminist literary magazine in Canada the 70s. And she's got all these papers. And we're faced with that problem of, I think they're important. I think she's an important person, but also there are boxes and boxes of papers.
Right.
And they're organized to some extent, but they're not completely filed. Does an archive want them? Archives have to think about their space. And in fact, her papers are going to the library. Fortunately, we're in Ottawa, so that's a helpful thing. We have the Library and Archives of Canada here. We've got more resources maybe than some places. So her papers are, in fact, going to go somewhere as a fond. Is that what it is? Yeah, it's called a fond or fond.
Yeah.
One collection, right? Yeah. But she also has all of these poetry books that she's bought from her friends and collected over the years. Literally 2,000-3,000 of them, because they're all very thin.
Right. If you've got small books, you can get a lot more in there.
Small books, you can get a lot. Yeah, I know. She was like, it's only 3 bookshelves, and I'm like, yeah, but Mom, each book. But that she wasn't able to find anyone who wanted that.
Oh, interesting.
Because they just wasn't able to, and so they're going off to use bookstores and things as a collection. It was interesting and useful. Right. But not quite interesting. Anyway, so that really is a tangent. It's just that really made me think of this struggle she's going through right now. And again, she's of that level where, and I'm not in any way trying to suggest that she's not an important person, but she's not important enough for it to be obvious that, of course, we would keep her stuff for generations But that doesn't mean that in 20 years, somebody wouldn't be interested in her correspondence with other poets around the country.
Yeah.
That's an interesting community. And there could easily be someone who'd be interested in writing a book about something, about the League of Canadian Poets or something, which she was president of for a bit, who might be interested in the work. But I'm not going to write that book. So anyway, it just makes me think of that, that question of what his grandchildren did.
Yeah. Yeah. And so interesting too, that I think one of the things that's fascinating about a family archive that's really different from an accessioned archive or a formal archive is that there's not a clear sense of why things were kept, apart from an oral history of why things were kept. In fact, a bunch of the things that were kept were things like condolence letters or invitations, which from a scholarly point of view, most people would go, who cares? But those things were actually so important to me, in part because it tells a story of I.H. Godlove and his family and his wife and the kind of community they had. And that was actually, those things were the most important things. Not any of his manuscripts, not any of the articles. It really was these very personal notes that were really kept for sentimental reasons and no other reason. Yeah, it spawned a bunch of conversations in my own family about when I kick off, do not go through my desk drawer and just start selling things. Don't publish. If you find something, it's not done. don't publish it, please. You know, these sorts of weird conversations that I'm sure my children are like, whatever, Mom. Okay, cool. Yeah.
One of the things that your research really reminded me of personally, having worked as a graduate student at the Dictionary of Old English, is how much the files are really the heart of a dictionary office.
Yeah.
And there's that incredible history of how approaches have changed over the years.
Yeah. And it is so fascinating because I think that's something that people who work in dictionary companies take for granted, that, you know, of course, you just got all these old bits of paper around, but it really is, dictionaries are a material object, even if they're online. And that materiality of all those slips, all of those notes, someone's handwriting in a moment, or little asides, really, those are the things that help put the humanity into a dictionary. And at Merriam-Webster, you know, it's so, I mean, the amount of stuff in the building is overwhelming. There's the card catalogs, which are, so they're each about 4.5 feet tall. They are 3 feet deep, and they are, I want to say, about 20 feet long, and they take up half the editorial floor, which is not a small floor, you know, and that's just the stuff that hasn't been digitized or isn't a native digital object. But that kind of stuff is so, each of those slips contains a microhistory of a single word in the dictionary and in the language, and what people were thinking about that word in the 30s or the 40s or the 50s or the 80s or the 90s or the 1890s. It's just, there's so much richness to it. And it really is this, I don't want to say it's better than the dictionary, but it adds a human dimension to the dictionary that I think folks that just, you know, look up words occasionally have no idea the kinds of thought that goes into just a simple, what they conceive of as a very simple definition.
And it sort of worries me that a lot of this materiality will be lost as things become more digital. Like when I arrived as a student working at the DOE, lemmatizing was putting all the slips into the right literal file folder.
Right.
And by the time I left, I was using the new lemmatizing software to assign words to the right head word. And so a lot of that kind of, all you get is the end product. You don't get the in-between, the decision-making, the little notes and things.
Yeah. And that's something I've talked to friends who are archivists and librarians about as well, which is the decision-making is really important, but it's also, I think we, in our modern age, tend to think of digital files as much more accessible, but in fact, they're not. It's anyone can pick up a piece of paper, no matter how old it is. And if you can read cursive, for instance, then you can read stuff back 300 years. But I have floppy disks that are only 15 years old that can no longer be read. And yeah, there is something about a physical archive that just, it contains a little bit more history, and it's so much more accessible, even though there are the problems of who has access to that archive and can you get to that archive?
So what does Merriam-Webster, the company, think about this book? You're very forthcoming about the history of the company and people in particular who work there.
It's not all positive.
It's not all positive. I haven't been sued yet, so I'm assuming they think it's fine. Yeah, I think one of the things I think that's so interesting about, especially Webster's Third, is it is a very important dictionary in both the history of North American dictionaries and in terms of a broader cultural understanding of what words are and what words mean. And so there is a mythology that's been built up around Webster's Third. And there is a mythology about, for instance, the editor-in-chief, whose name is Philip Babcock Gove, being this hard-driving, brilliant man. And that is true. He was very hard-driving and he was very smart. But it also is, a dictionary is a group project. It's not, even the dictionaries that just have one person's name on them, like Samuel Johnson's dictionary, it was not entirely Samuel Johnson's work from beginning to end that led to that book. He had assistants, and he had editors, and he got notes from other people, and it's the same with the third. So what's interesting to me is that the third it really is held up as this sort of, I say in the book, it's an old man in the sea narrative, right? Like it's one guy out in a boat, wrangling the English language, strapping it to his hull and coming into shore. And there's just no dictionary is like that. They're all group projects, and they're all shaped by a number of different people. Even if you can't read through the staff masthead and say, oh, that person contributed to this particular thing. They are group projects. And it was the same with the third. A lot of the things that were attributed to Gove were actually thought of by other people. And it just, Gove got the credit because Gove was the big name on the masthead and not the smaller name on the masthead.
And I guess there's been, as you alluded to right at the beginning, there's been other books about the history of the third. It's not like Merriam-Webster as a company has not faced the discussion and controversy or,
right.
Around it. So I imagine you haven't, I don't want to promise people uncovered skeletons. That's not exactly what was going on.
No, or very boring skeletons, not very exciting skeletons. No,
But it was interesting to think because obviously you are accessing and using their records to tell the story. And there were moments in it, not many, but there were moments where I thought, did they know she was going to say this about them when they gave her this? Right. I can't really see that it would do Merriam-Webster any harm. It's publicity. It's not in any way detrimental.
Yeah, and also it's about a period of history that ends, before I think most of the people who currently work at the company were born. So I think we're okay. Yes. Yeah.
And I'm glad that they did not feel any worries about it because it's a wonderful story. So, it's good.
It is good.
It did cross my mind a couple of times.
Right. Yeah, I get it.
So the third, Merriam-Webster in general, not just the third edition, but it's always sought to be authoritative. But what that means has changed over the years from the second to the third and beyond. How would you characterize that change in relation to color words, or even more generally?
Yeah, I think there was a shift between the second and the third. So the second came out in 1934, the third came out in 1961. And there was a shift in approach that I think had a huge impact on people's understanding of the dictionary as an authority. So prior to the third, so for the second, and for most of the history of English dictionaries before that, particularly in the modern age, you had a lot of, I don't want to say snobbishness, but the dictionary was a didactic tool. It was used in schools. And so when you had a dictionary enter a word, it was the best practices of English, generally speaking. Especially these big general use dictionaries like the second or the third or any of its descendants. A general use dictionary would have the vocabulary that you need, and it would explain to you how educated users of English use this word. And it would do so in sort of a, if not a conversational style, then sort of a professorial, fusty, tweed jacket, leather elbow patches kind of style. Lots of quotes from Shakespeare and Pope and Dryden, that kind of thing. The third was meant to be a dictionary for the modern age, and particularly a dictionary that followed sort of the modern push in linguistics towards structuralism. So this sense that we can describe very dispassionately and very consistently, formulaically, how all of these meanings relate to each other. And that really was a Govian. That was Philip Babcock Gove bringing that sensibility to the third, that we want the third to capture as much of the language as possible. It's going to use more linguistic language when describing words. So instead of saying, for instance, that irregardless is illiterate and uneducated, both labels that were used in the second, it would instead just say it's non-standard English, which, okay, that is true. But when people are wanting you to say, Oh no, irregardless is uneducated. Then non-standard doesn't communicate that to someone who's not a linguist. So the third was very dispassionate. It was meant to be very objective. The defining style is so dry and so boring. It really is a dictionary that will put you to sleep. And I say that as someone who, I'm speaking to two people who probably would read dictionaries for fun. And this is one that would knock you out. Yeah. So, but the way that the third did that conveyed to people, and this was actually played up by critics of the third, that you can't be objective about language. And that's not what people want. People want you as an authority to say this is good, this is bad, use this, don't use this. They don't want you to say, this is a word that doesn't appear in any of the standard dialects of American English. That doesn't mean anything to people. What does that mean? Can I use it in my book report or not? How do I use this? And a lot of the ways that the third was criticized specifically had to do with the idea that they were entering more slang, they were quoting more normal users of the language, so less Dryden, less Shakespeare. They quoted Mickey Spillane, and they quoted Polly Adler, notoriously, who was a very famous madam, so brothel keeper. And there was a big outcry that this is not what an authority should be doing. An authority really should be looking at the best practices of English. Now, what's fascinating is that Merriam-Webster never really backed down from that stance until really recently. I wouldn't say that it's no longer trying to be objective, but my experience, particularly at the end of my time there, was that we were sort of abandoning a little bit of the very formal linguistic ways of talking about words in favor of some more plain language and longer explanations. So instead of just one label and a small usage paragraph, you might get a label and a much longer usage paragraph that would talk about that irregardless is in fact common in some of the dialects of spoken English, but if you use it in writing, people will make assumptions about your education level, but it has a long history. It's very interesting because I think that it's not necessarily that there's been a swing away from trying to very dispassionately and objectively describe language, but I think there's an understanding that we ourselves are users of language, and so we bring our own biases, we bring our own sense of what's appropriate, what's not appropriate to all of the language with us. And one of the things that's great about being a lexicographer is you get to see a whole lot of the language in use. And that's really exciting. And you're also given tools to help parse that and to help dive into the history of that language. And so why would you not want to sort of meet people where they are, as opposed to demanding that people come meet you on this high linguistic ground that very few people can? So it's interesting because I think that the idea of the dictionary as an authority is still very much the same in most people's minds, right? I think that a modern reader of a dictionary today would have a lot in common with a dictionary consultant of 100 years ago. But the way that the dictionary is conveying that sense of authority and the way the dictionary is giving guidance has changed dramatically.
Yeah, probably shouldn't get into the full dictionary wars discussion about prescriptivism and
but some people got real mad.
Yeah, they got
touch on it obviously towards the end.
Yeah, they got real mad. They did get real mad. Yeah. It's true.
But that is perhaps a story for another conversation. I think we did talk a little bit about that actually when we talked about the AHD, you and I, when the new edition came out. Yeah. Marcy and I did talk about that a bit. Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, though, the book, I don't want to say takes tangents because that's not correct, but while it loops in your concentric circles many other facets of what's going on in the world and the history of color and a bunch of other stuff, in terms of talking about other dictionaries and this question of definitions, you do talk a bit about the AHD. Mm-hmm.
I do.
And the American Heritage Dictionary, which comes about after the third and because of it. But also, you don't talk a lot about other approaches to color defining. That's because you wanted it not to be formal.
Yeah, that's mostly it. That's 95% of why. Yeah.
I understand that. But I imagine you have thought about it. So what are some of the other approaches to handling color word definitions? Like, obviously, there's the OED, which has a very different approach to what it considers itself to be doing as a historical dictionary. Have you looked at all at how other languages define? There's a million questions one could ask about this. How other dictionaries do it. And here's the $1 million question, which you may decide you don't want to even try to answer. How do you think one should define color words? What would be the best way to do it?
Oh, boy.
Because while the story you tell is fascinating, I would not say that at the end of it, the conclusion is a resounding success.
Yeah, I would
defining color words.
I would say that is accurate. So I think we can start with what are other ways of defining color words. And I'll start with English because it's the language that I'm fluent in. You know, it's important to note that a lot of dictionaries enter comparatively few color names compared to the third. The third has about 3,000 color names, a little over that. And
that is a lot.
It is a lot. And most, even other unabridged dictionaries, don't enter nearly as many because we just don't have many color names that have really consistent use historically across a long period of time. And color names change notoriously, actually, all the time. We need to start by saying that the third is an outlier, not just in its defining style, but in the number of definitions it contains for color names. So with that said, there are lots of ways to define color terms, and I think some of it depends on your audience. When I worked at Merriam-Webster, I worked on dictionaries for children and dictionaries for adults who are learning English as a foreign language.
Right.
And doing color names for those two groups is really different than doing color names for scientists, let's say.
Right.
So you can define by analogy. So blue is the color of the clear sky. Red is the color of blood. Rose is the color of the flower. Lilac is the color, the pinkish purple of the flower. You can define by analogy. And weirdly enough, any analogy is going to be wrong in some way, right? Red is the color of blood, sure. That is a red, and but that's not all the reds.
And some blood, yes, not dried blood, not old
exactly,
blood.
Yeah. The color of the clear sky is going to be a different color depending on the time of year and your altitude and where you are in terms of proximity to the equator. There's all sorts of stuff that goes into that. But the thing that's fascinating about defining by analogy is we don't necessarily take the thing that we're pointing to literally. We do all kind of common speakers of a language have a canonical color or a canonical item in their brain. If I say to you daffodil, you have a picture, a very particular picture of a flower that is yellow in your head. No matter daffodils come in all sorts of different colors, you think, oh, it's yellow.
Yeah.
So defining by analogy, it has its pitfalls, but it is actually a really helpful way of doing things. It starts getting tricky when you get color terms that don't have an analog in the natural world.
Or not an obvious
one. Right. So I note this in the book, and it is one of my favorite color names. The color name duckling, which I naturally assumed was like a lovely lemon yellow, is actually a deep, saturated greenish blue. And I don't know why. because that's not the color of ducklings to me. That deep blue is not. Ducklings are canonically fluffy little yellow balls of fluff. That's what ducklings are. So defining by analogy, iffy. If you are defining for a technical audience, then you can use all sorts of different things. You can use any one of the nomenclatures that scientists use when talking about color. So that can be everything from the percentage of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, or red, green, and blue, depending on if you're printing or if you're dealing with light. You can find any one of the, there's at least a dozen, if not a couple dozen, ways of talking about and measuring color that have to do with these specific systems that are closed systems, C-Lab and C-Love and CXYZ, like all of these things. You can use that. And that mostly works for some technical audiences, but not all technical audiences, because the reason there's so many of those systems is because different systems communicate different things. Then you have the opposite problem with defining by analogy. You've used something very precise, it doesn't work. One of the other ways that we can define in English, and I think this is actually probably the only way we can do it, is to just be very vague. So we can use what are called the basic color categories. We have 11 of those in English. So that's red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, brown, pink, white, black, and gray. And then a modifier that gets people in the right direction. So we know, for instance, that light and dark are opposite ends of a spectrum in color. And we know that dull and bright are opposite ends of another spectrum. So if I say something is bright pink or dark blue, that kind of, it gives you, it puts you in a general neighborhood. The trick is, how do I tell you the difference between all of these bright pinks? Like, how do I say magenta and fuchsia are different bright pinks? Or maybe they're not even bright pink to you. We start getting into these weird edge colors too. Turquoise and teal are impossible to define satisfactorily because some people put them in blue and some people put them in green. And if you say that it's a light greenish blue to a light bluish green, people lose their minds because it can't be both. How can you say it's both? So it gets tricky. And then in other languages, of course, you have a completely different way of dealing with it. I do language revitalization work with an Algonquian language. And that language has a whole bunch of standard basic color terms, but the color term that's most often used for blue means both blue and green. Some greens and some blues. But how do I communicate that to people whose primary language is English? Because it's not, it makes sense in the indigenous worldview, but it doesn't make sense to English speakers because that's not how we think of color. It's the same way if we're dealing with Russian, which has two primary blues. Like when I say blue to my Russian friends, I know that I have to light blue or dark blue. we play that game.
Yeah.
And as classicists and medievalists, you will also appreciate that ancient Greek has at least two terms for blue, and they're not quite the blues that we have, though one of them is the etymological core of the word cyan. But Kuaneos is it encompasses other blues that we don't necessarily think of as blue, and Glaukos the same. So it's really difficult to try and... Languages can be closed systems, but we can translate between them. Translating color terms between language systems can be really, really difficult.
Yeah. No, translation is really a huge pitfall on that one because you're translating not how people's brains work exactly.
Right.
But
right.
I just want to be clear, I'm not saying that. But you are translating a whole set of cultural touchstones, right?
Yeah.
Because the daffodil is only daffodil if you've seen a daffodil.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So that just as a very basic thing,
Yeah.
apple wouldn't have meant, does apple mean green or red?
Right, yeah.
Very, really simple things.
Yeah.
And that's what I imagine you get to with children. And your duckling point, yeah, ducklings are yellow. But in fact, I've seen a lot of ducklings on TikTok recently. People are really into duckling posting on TikTok at the moment.
Who knew?
And a lot of them are dark colored because, in fact, a lot of ducklings, and like mallards, the ducklings we see on the river near us, their ducklings are dark brown, bluish green.
Right.
That's what they
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
But I still think of ducklings as yellow because I've seen enough ABC books that have
Right,
little ducklings
right.
in them as a child.
I watch
so that's fixed in
cartoons.
my
Yeah,
brain.
exactly.
Yeah, I know what they
Yeah,
are.
exactly.
So these things are things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did want to bring that up because, of course, we did a whole series on words for color in Greek, Latin, and Old English. And it's interesting when you talk about these ways of defining color, not to say that one doesn't need to, but my head goes to, I don't really, if I'm a native speaker of a language, or even not a native speaker of a language, but a speaker of the language who's gone past very basic, I know what the basic color terms mean, right? Like, realistically, a dictionary is almost never going to be telling somebody for the first time what red means.
Right. Yeah.
Not any kind of general usage term. So red doesn't need to be defined really, even though a dictionary was never going to leave it out.
Right.
And then you get into the big question of the 3,000 other terms.
Right.
But my head goes to, well, I don't really care what hue or shade or saturation a color is. What I want my dictionary to tell me is what's important about this color. So scarlet, what are the associations of scarlet? How is it used in a cultural sense? What does it tell me about the thing? Of course, a dictionary is not going to be able to tell me all of those details.
Yeah.
It's asking a lot of a dictionary. But nonetheless, I don't actually, personally, if a dictionary told me it's bright pink, I'd be like, okay, good. That's all I need to know. Because really what I need to know is that bright pink has, I know what the cultural associations of bright pink are. So if you can just tell me that this color word means bright pink, I don't care what bright pink it is.
Right.
I need to know that, it's going to convey bubblegum and Barbie and femininity if it's post 1920, etc.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas, and all the way through the book, like the book was totally fascinating, but a part of me the whole way through was, but I don't care. Why would I go to a dictionary for what shade, what precise shade Rosedelphia is compared to? That just is. But what does matter to me when I go to my Greek dictionary, it tells me, okay, yes, glaukos and kuaneos are two words for blue. What it does, now this is something you can do when you have a finite corpus, and this is a very huge difference between a classical dictionary and a living language dictionary. But what it does, it says of the sea.
Right.
Of the sea.
Yeah.
Gray glaukos, of eyes, gray blue, of dogs, grayish brown. And it gives these restrictions, the definitions, and it does that not just for color words, it does that all over the place because it can say this word turns up 23 times and 7 of them are in reference to this kind of a word, and obviously that's impossible in English.
Right.
But is that kind of an approach also potentially something that one could use for these emotive and culturally significant kinds of words like color words? In English. I mean, not in that restrictive a way, but I mean, to gesture.
Assuming that word, that color term, has a consistent sort of emotive collocation. Emotive quality or collocation. And that's really the trick is, I tend to agree with you. After having spent a decade writing this dumb book and having written it, I don't know if we need a common language, a common written language to convey every minute, fine differentiation between different colors, because I think most of us, when we encounter color names that don't have a color chip with them, what we really want to know is, if I'm getting a blouse in ambroon, I would never buy a blouse. But if I were to be the kind of person who would buy a blouse and it was in ambroon, I would just want to know, like, is that red? Is that blue? Is that orange? What is that? I don't think that I would want more than that. What's fascinating is that color names, particularly in the modern era, if they're not the basic color category or they're not intrinsic color names, so colors named after things in the natural environment, they're almost always a marketing ploy. And marketing changes all the time. So that's the thing that is really fascinating to me, is you have a handful of color names that are marketing terms, really, that are pretty consistent. But I also don't know, for instance, is someone really going to want to know the difference between claret and burgundy? Is it enough to just say they're both like dark reds? Is that enough? And
wine colored.
Wine colored, yeah, right,
on
yeah.
that.
Wine dark. They're wine dark, yeah. But, you know, it's interesting to think about how most of us, our encounters with color names, especially in the modern era, come with sort of a visual referent, right? I can say, oh, this pair of pants is in burgundy, and there's only 4 colors of pants on the rack. And I know that one's white, and that one's black, and that one's gray. So
Yeah.
this other one that's dark red must be burgundy. That's how most of us experience color names. But what's fascinating is that it was so important for this group of people and the whole sections of the government and whole sections of industry and art to sort of say, no. When we say raw umber, it is really just referring to this color, which is different from raw sienna.
Only this color.
Yeah, or burnt umber this way. Or if I'm manufacturing coatings for metal, when I say navy blue, I'm referring specifically to this coating that has this property on metal and not the paint and not the dye and not the colorant that you put in plastic. So it's so fascinating because somebody clearly felt a need for it enough that dictionaries invested extensively, not just Merriam-Webster, but as you said, American Heritage, invested extensively in getting someone to come up with these fine color distinctions and to do it for hundreds, if not thousands of words. And yet, and what's fascinating is that this is also inherent, I think, to a particular era of dictionary making in America, which was the third was meant to be a dictionary of pure language, the editors called it. But there was also so much encyclopedic and sort of cultural information that snuck in, because that's what unabridged dictionaries were for 100 years. Was I love, it was, I think for the second, there was a marketing page that I ran across in an archive. It was a picture of someone holding the second New International, which is difficult to do because it's enormous. It's about 8 inches thick and it weighs 20 pounds. But it's this line drawing of 2 hands holding the second. And it says, hold the sum of all human knowledge in your hands. Which is,
Right.
we think, we have access to the internet. We think that's ridiculous. But I mean, if people were going to drop the equivalent of half a month's salary on a big book, then it better have all of the sum of human knowledge in between its covers. So there is this interesting sense where there was a drive to collect and categorize everything because we could and we should.
It seemed doable. Yeah.
Yeah, and this was also something that was happening in the broader culture as well. I talk in the book about sort of this huge scientific push to measure, categorize, standardize, and it wasn't just color, it was everything. Like we wanted to get our mitts and our brains around every possible thing that we could. And so why not color? 200 years ago, the idea that we would know what kind of matter makes up space was insane. But that by the 60s, when the third came out, yeah, we have that technology. We could, even if we didn't know it then, we could figure it out eventually. Or the idea that we could see anything at the atomic scale was impossible. And now, if you attend university and you take a college science class, there's a chance that you'll get to see something on an atomic scale every lecture. So it's so this idea that if we can measure and quantify everything, why would we not do that? That would surely only benefit us. But also not really. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess that's where the marketing people in the company step in, and just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean you should do something. They're worried about, what do we need to be able to say to sell copies of this very expensive to make book?
Exactly. And that the marketing really was the downfall of the third in so many ways. And there are other better books about the marketing of the third and how it sort of fed this idea that the dictionary had given up its position as the great teacher of America and was just kind of letting any old slop in. But there is this sense where you do have to find a way to take this very, at heart, academic and intellectual and extremely abstruse exercise and make it not just interesting to people, but attractive, right? People, as you said, like, it's not just that you want people to buy copies of this book, but you're also selling a book that everyone is going to buy exactly one copy of in their entire lifetime. So you got to make it sound like it is the best thing since sliced bread and beyond. So it is this fascinating juxtaposition of this intellectual exercise and the sale of something that is very intellectual. And it mirrors a lot of what happens in color, too. Scientists come up with a color, and then marketers have to figure out, okay, this is a very dull brown. No one's going to buy anything in this brown. But if we call it Aloma, that sounds like, ooh, that sounds like the Old West. And now maybe we can, it's, words are so associative. And that's really the thing that is so fascinating to me, is that I can go through all 3,000 of the color names in the third. And for ones that don't have a core color term attached to them, like Bremen blue, for something like Aloma, I don't, without even looking at the definition, I immediately have a sense of like, oh, Aloma it sounds like the American Southwest in the 1940s, or, oh, it sounds like a Floridian seaside village for retirees. And there are colors I associate with that. Now, it's not the color that Aloma actually is, but that's okay. We have these really fascinating associations, just even with the sounds of words, which marketers build on that.
Okay, I have about 70,000 other questions, but I don't want to...
Sorry.
No, it's...
As many questions as there are
as there are color terms,
Well, we'll close off in a moment, but I will just... This is also going to be an aside. One of the things I did not write my PhD dissertation on because somebody else put out a book. What I wanted to do was on the use of color terms in Latin poetry.
Oh,
that was literally my dissertation. Like, I got as far as a proposal before a book on color terms in Latin poetry came out. Now, what she had done was just go through and basically do a catalog of which terms were we used in which books. Right. But what I cared about was exactly what you're talking about, right? The associative and senses of color, because in fact, Latin poetry is surprisingly undescriptive. Like, we think of poetry as being all about imagery, but it's really not very descriptive. And in fact, they don't use color terms very often, especially outside of epic where you get your formulae. But outside of that, it's really not that many. So it's like a surprisingly restricted number of color terms. And I feel that they most of them have very strong associations because color is really important, but also the particular terms, which word for black you use. One means glossy black and has to do with interesting things, and the other one is a dead black and has to do with death.
Right.
For instance. Yeah. Anyway, I never went down that road, but it's been something I've always been very interested in. So just to give a little context to why I'm so excited about this.
So you finish listening to this and then you turn to Marcy and you say, okay, but here's the thing about Diger and Ater, right? Like,
exactly. Oh yeah. Don't worry. She's had to hear me do all of this already. I can talk about purple for so long.
Oh my gosh.
I used to...
Purpura is an insane color. Yeah. Yes.
Absolutely. My students, back when I used to teach, at some point in almost every course, didn't matter the course, somebody would say something about the word, about purple, or would come up in some context, and I'd pause, and I'd take a breath, and I'd look at the class, and I'd be like, all right,
here we go.
You did it.
Yep.
Here we go.
Hold on.
25 minutes on purple. Go.
Yep.
I have so much to say about its connotations in classical Roman thought. And anyway, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, all to say, this was, to a large extent, given how much I've thought about color, entirely new information in this book, which was fabulous.
I'm so glad. I had a whole section on purple that I had to cut because 4 different volumes.
One does.
As one does, yeah. But the thing that's fascinating to me about, especially the core color terms, is dictionaries really until the late 1800s in English dictionaries were just terrible about including color terms. But purple was one that got...
It just didn't.
Yeah, and purple was one that got included regularly because of its use in heraldry, but also defined so badly. Just like, I had a whole like long disquisition on how terrible people were at defining purple and how the definition of purple changed after mauve was invented. Mauvine was invented.
Yes.
Yeah, because
after an actual purple color.
Yeah. As opposed to, its use in heraldry was the first time I ran into purple in a historical English dictionary. I was like, what the hell? That is not purple. You're describing red. Stop saying it's red. Yeah. Yep.
Well, exactly. And that's the thing, right? Or blue.
Right, yeah.
It can also be a pure... Yeah, when you go back to the dye. Anyway, I won't, but...
You could, but well...
I could. No, it's good. Okay. Sorry, let me pull this back on the rails as I wandered off my own little personal bugbear.
It's fine.
But we'll end with the most obvious question, but also hopefully fun.
And I suppose this is really two questions, really. But one, what's your favorite color? And can you even have a favorite color when you've been dealing with literally thousands of colors and words for colors for so long?
That is such a good question. So here's the funny thing. I think all of us have favorite colors. Even if you're, how do you say it? Aphantastic? Aphantasic. You are a fantastic person. Yeah. We just all have, because they're visual sensations and they cause a feeling in us. We go, oh, I like that. So I have colors that I look at and I go, oh, I like that. But after doing the book, the colors that I like the most are actually colors whose names and definitions, the sound of the word and the definition do not match up at all in my brain. So duckling is one. I love duckling. I do like dark saturated colors too, but I just love, like, duckling is a color that doesn't match the image in your head. I love that. There's a primrose green that is a yellow. There's lake, which can be a blue and also a red. So it has completely left the realm of visual sensation for me, which, is the whole point of color. It is a psychophysical sensation that you have. And it has completely become about the sound of the word and the connotation of the word and how absolutely wrong my sense of the sound and connotation are compared to its reality.
That's a perfect answer. For the book.
And I guess also purple, right?
I also have pressed purple. Yeah. They're almost essentially contronyms. In a sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
But only because of the associations or whatever. And maybe idiosyncratic contronyms.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. Yes.
Well, it's a very weird way of putting it, frankly, but we'll go with good.
It's fine. It's English.
But we all understand it.
What is English but a whole bunch of weird ways of putting things, so...
Oh, this has been absolutely delightful. I cannot more strongly recommend a book than I recommend this to anyone.
Oh, indeed.
Anyone who would listen to our podcast will adore this book. So please do find it. And also, I really strongly recommend the audiobook if you have the chance. Very good.
Unless you speak French.
But tell us, Kory. Yes, that's all right. I think there was only one word where I actually repeated it after you said it.
You went, I don't think so. Yeah,
oh,
right.
No, okay. I get
right.
it.
Yep. Yeah.
Other than that, it was all fine. And I couldn't do justice to Spanish or German or anything, so we all have
That's right.
our limitations. But where else can people find you and your work, Kory?
You can find me at my newly resurrected blog, which is korystamper.com, and I occasionally post on Blue Sky, and I occasionally tour the country with ridiculous slides about color.
There's no way anyone couldn't find you after that. Comprehensive.
Right. There you go.
Just wander the cities of America looking for...
Just on the side of the road, me and my projector and my computer. We'll read ridiculous slides for money. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
It's been an absolutely delightful conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And in 12 years, I look forward to what the next one is.
I better get to writing then.
Yeah. Goodbye.
All right. Thanks, guys. It was so good to talk to y'all.
For more information on this podcast, check out our website, www.alliterative.net, where you can find links to the videos, blog posts, sources, and credits, and all our contact info.
And please check out our Patreon, where you can pledge to support this show and our video project. You can go directly to the videos at youtube.com/alliterative.
Our email is on the website, but the easiest way to get in touch with us is Twitter. I'm at Avensarah, AVENSARAH.
And I'm at alliterative. To keep up with the podcast, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or to the feed on the website.
And if you've enjoyed it, consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. It helps us a lot. We'll be back soon with more musings about the connections around us. Thanks for listening.
Bye!